Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our True Talk Thursday vodcast, a platform that encourages a thought-provoking conversation about topics centered around education. What's so neat about this vodcast is that you'll hear opinions, experiences, research, and ideas from various perspectives, but I want to remind you all that the views and opinions expressed tonight do not necessarily reflect that of ALAS. So now, driving the conversation tonight, we have the Executive Director of ALAS, Dr. Maria Armstrong. And so without further ado, I will turn to her to start the conversation. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Francois. Well, I got to open up by saying that we're going to be missing my co-host, Dr. Atiba-Weza. He had to be pulled away for an emergency board meeting, and we know that takes precedence. So we have to forge through tonight without him. But I will be asking the questions that we both kind of co-crafted on. So with that, we hope everything's going well with that. So I get to have the great pleasure of bringing to our audience Evelyn DeJesus, who is the AFT Executive Vice President. And I want to talk a little bit before I let you start answering some questions or sharing your thoughts, Evelyn. I want to give our folks just kind of a brief background of who you are.
Okay.
So it looks like back in 2019 is when you actually took the position as the AFL-CIO, American Federation of Teachers. But you actually began your career in education working as a state certified parent educator. And then you moved up the ranks, if you will, as an assistant director for the Even Start program, which is, working with pregnant teens. And the whole time you were also in school. So you were doing school and going to school. It's something that I'm a little familiar with. So I think that's probably why we hit it off so well. You then went on to become an early childhood education teacher and then a reading specialist in New York at public school number 126. Is that right? All right. And then you went on and earned your BA and in psychology, which I'm sure is very helpful for what you do now, and your master's in education and public administration. You went on to get you got a second master's in reading and curriculum, and it just seems like you really do believe in lifelong learning. So now you're a skilled and trained teacher and administrator, and you just are a force to be reckoned with, because you've got those two under your belt there. But I think what really is probably of all of the accolades that you have in your bio, I think the one that I admire so much is the one where you are an advocate for justice and you are unafraid when it comes to speaking your truth to what can happen and make better systems and situations for kids. And so, I could go on and on, but I think, you have a lot of experience, a lot of stories that you could share with. And that's really why I'm so excited to have you as a part of our True Talk Thursday. And so let's go ahead and let's just jump into a conversation, Evelyn. We've chatted here and there on the fly, but now we actually have a little chunk of time to chit chat.
Okay.
So what's on your mind right now? Is it, I don't know, maybe reopening schools?
maybe a tad. So Maria, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here partnering with ALAS and we have kindred spirits. The first minute we met, our kind of pathways are very similar. So we nos entendemos, like we say,
Mm-hmm.
And today I was thinking, just being here with you, thinking about 4 or 5 things I would like to focus on. I think our members and your members would like to talk about. The first thing I think about is, how do we get into this mess? And I think about what my union, the 1.7 million member AFT, what are we doing about it? Then I was thinking about you know, we should talk about the reopening of schools, how, you know, aligning really well with the, you know, our school, you know, we have a reopening plan that's aligned really well with the new CDC guidelines, and what our locals are negotiating with your members and my members with schools across districts to increase the amount, because the goal is to open and the goal is to have in-person schooling across the country. And third, I was thinking about how life has been for Black and Brown Latino students and their families over the past 11 months. And what do we need to do about it for the future to dramatically improve? It's an opportunity here to dramatically improve the education they are receiving. And then fourth, what our teachers, our members themselves are thinking. We took a survey I want to talk about, and what are they doing about it, and how they're thinking about what are their fears or their angst or their thoughts about reopening schools. What do you think?
I love it. It's all the stuff that, you know, everywhere we turn, every conversation that we have had and continue to have is centered around those exact topics. There isn't a parent, there isn't a student that's not affected by education. There's not an administrator, not a, you know, teacher that's affected by what's been going on. So, you know, you brought up in your first question that point, how did we get here? I love that opening, you know, because it's so massive. People think that it was just this one thing, you know, if this one thing hadn't happened. But what are your thoughts about how did we get here?
So I think it's been very controversial because, to be honest, we had a president and a secretary of education that for the first 11 months of the pandemic, they had no plan. Let's talk about that. They dismissed the science of infectious diseases and the people that knew, you know, the scientists that knew and the doctors that knew what was going on and what they were doing. And they combined magical thinking with teacher bashing and called it a reopening policy. There was no plan. There was no reopening policy for your members or my members. And, you know, the union, my union, the AFT, issued last April, I don't know if you were aware of this, Maria, last April, they issued a science-based blueprint for reopening schools. So since April, we've been fighting. And educators know that to thrive, children need in-person learning. And that's why we've been working since last April and to today. We're working day and night with you, with everyone, to make this happen, because it can be done. If we're eager enough and we're strong enough and we're collaborative enough, we can do it. And second, teachers do what needs to be done. You know that, I know that as teachers. We bought food, we bought clothes, we got up early, we planned our lessons, we had our own kids. We do what needs to be done. And we've been doing it for many months. So, as you can see, we need to getting away of the reopening. We want to be there, and our members know exactly what to do and how to do it. But we cannot. Your members, my members cannot do it without the resources to put into our reopening plans, to work. And if you look at reopening plans in Boston, Chicago, my home state of New York City, and San Francisco, you see it's possible to do so. For example, in New York, when I was there, the UFT has negotiated a deal with the city for all school staff to get vaccinated. Every principal, every teacher, every student, every para, everyone to get vaccinated, with priority for those teachers providing in-person instruction. So if your administrators are there, if your teachers are in person, they should be the priority. And in Washington, D.C., your town, our local Washington Teachers Union worked with the district and city to prioritize vaccinations for educators and school support staff. They had a specific location for educators to get vaccinated. I'm sure have you gotten your vaccination yet?
I can't find time or in the day. I think I need more than 24 hours to be able to get, you're lucky if I get out to get groceries. I don't even have time to order them sometimes, you know? So, you know, I haven't. And you bring up some very interesting parallels of April. You know, that date just stands out. You know, this is no plan, and you know, I mean, we could do this all night long, and it really, it's like it's the rear view mirror, right? Mm-hmm. But I gotcha when you talk about, you know, in April we said we got to do this. Let's just roll up our sleeves and do this. we felt the same way.
Yeah.
In April, we launched our very first webinar. Never happened before, never had to happen before. But, having been a superintendent and a teacher first and foremost, and moved up the ranks, because people forget, our members, it's like a seed. It grows into something, right? Mm-hmm. And so people forget there's not a division, it's a continuum. That's the way I like to see it. And so, our administrators, they were frontline too, and I kept saying, man, they're doing the laptops and the lunches as they should, because you're right. We roll up our sleeves, and we do what we got to do. But we also know that as leaders, needed to pull them out of the weeds so they can get back to that 30,000 foot level, because that is part of their leadership role, is to be able to see the big picture of what I like to say, down the street and around the corner. Porque the gente, our parents and our kids and our, everybody, the communities, and rightly so, we're going to start asking, so what's the plan? What do we got going on? It's great that you're down here doing this, but what about next week? What about, tomorrow? And so I totally get what you're saying. And I think that there was a lot of parallel activity that was going on, and the plan was starting to get created. Mm-hmm. And so, and you're right. And I want to talk about, New York was the epicenter. That's when, that's where the egg broke, if you will. And we all, even though we know that it had been hanging around, some of us had, got sick and didn't know that it was that, could have been that for all we know. It was just.
I just in full transparency, I got COVID really, really bad. I had a stroke. I had Bell's palsy. I lost my mamita. And it was a really hard time. And during that time, we were negotiating, because remember, we had CSA, in New York, we had UFT, we had DOE, we had department. Everyone was together saying, let's put our thinking hats together. Let's put all these ideas in together to see if we can do some guidelines. But then on the national base, the union said, we need to have a blueprint, not just for New York, but for
everybody. That's right.
And I just wanted to talk about, because you said something, and not everybody knows what we were doing and what's on these plans. And I think it's important that we inform our members. Yep. Like, for instance, our plan has 6 essential pillars, which I'm sure you would agree. COVID-19 testing must become a way of life in schools. That's the new way of life. And we need to test regularly and rapidly to monitor the in and outs of this virus. And for your members and my members, proper safety protocols, including masks, physical distance. They talk about it, but is that really happening? Cleaning and sanitizing. I remember I took my mother-in-law to a hospital in New York City, and we were there like for an hour. I was waiting outside while she was, and people were coming in and out of the bathroom. I didn't, that has to be mandated, because if not, we'll never get rid of this virus. And then what about the teachers, that can't come in, that need the appropriate accommodations because they're living with abuelitas, or they have diabetes, they have some type of sickness. We have to have appropriate accommodations. And vaccine, as you said, vaccine prioritization. We should be the priorities, and school staff align with in-person learning. Your members, my members that are coming in every day, they should be the priority. And now, another thing to worry about is the new variants. Communities need a metric for community infection rates that will trigger increasing safeguards, including if we have to close temporarily. And every school, with your members, my members, have a safety committee. A committee that comes together and said, okay, what are we doing? What's not here? How do we advocate? Well, how do we put the resources together? So these 6 pillars are some type of, they're a framework on how every district, every state can look at it very close to the CD guidelines and say, if we follow this, our teachers, I know, and your members will know, we're doing the right thing, and we can try to keep us safe and work as much as we can and keep these students safe, because they need it.
Yeah. So Evelyn, I got a question for you, because as you're talking, I'm like, hey, I don't even know this, but so your membership for AFT, because I remember, as a classroom teacher, we have our state membership, and then it like automatically we're part of NEA or things like that. There was some kind of
merge. Yeah, there's some.
Yeah, that right, exactly. And then if you wanted to, you could also, be a member of UFT and AFT, right? And so those were like the options. So is AFT in all the states across the nation or in some states?
In some states, not all the states.
Okay.
We don't have locals in every state.
Okay. And the reason I asked that is because, I have people, I even have my own kids my grandkids are still in schools, right? And so, the question is, why did some states, like they haven't missed a beat. They've been going to school since day one, como nada. And they've got their safety protocols in place. When somebody does have, come down, when one of the kids come down, they've got their plans all played. They never missed a beat on in-person schooling. Why is it that some states did and some states didn't?
Well,
do you hear that? Do you hear that from members?
I think some states are doing better than others. I think also, it's all about the resources. So not every state has the same resource or use the resources accordingly. Yeah. So that's why, many of the big locals that you would think will have, because you have much more members, they're strong, they're coming in, they're collaborating, they're making sure that the safety committees are in schools, and they're making sure that their resources, you got to talk to your school communities, you got to talk to the boards, you have to talk to your senators, your congressmen, making sure that all this, the money, that 1.9 trillion that Biden wants to pass comes into these schools. We cannot do it. We cannot do it if we don't have the resources, because they're going to keep closing and opening, closing. But if we do it, we follow the CDC guidelines and we get the resources we need. Everybody has their autonomy, whatever state and local negotiate according to, all the unions and the community and everyone there. And they could, come together and do the right thing.
Yeah. So, you mentioned how, you've got some examples of some areas that are doing a fabulous job of it, and others can learn from it. But I don't want you to answer that right now, because we'll be right back.
Hey there, and don't forget, if you like what you hear and want to gain some more insight into what school districts are facing now, then tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. or subscribe below. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great night.